But you say, oh, isn't there a distinction between liking something and eating it or whatnot? And you're kind of what you said, you're nitpicking. And maybe there is. But of course, that would make this question very difficult. All right. Welcome, LSAT Dominators. It's Henry. And it's also...
Hi, ZeSean.
And we're back giving you some tips to dominate the test this summer or in the future, too. Might be fall, too. I don't know. Summer and fall. That's when people take the test. Spring, sometimes.
They take it year round these days.
Yeah, that is true. It's a year-long destination. It's like Hawaii, right? Don't people go to
Right.
Do people go to Hawaii?
Yes. It's always sunny at the LSAT.
Yeah. AIASLAST? Something like that.
SAT. There you
So,
go.
if someone wants to figure that out. Speaking of sunniness, we have a question today from Ashley, a user-submitted question. What would you say about noticing a trend where I get harder questions right, but I'm missing the easier questions? It's a good question. What do you say about that, ZeSean?
Yeah, well, thank you, Ashley, for this question. This happens so often, I think, and there's maybe a couple of things going on. One is that maybe you are overthinking these easy questions, that your brain really turns on for the hard questions. And then when you get to the easy questions, you're kind of over scrutinizing the answer choices and you're looking for problems within them. And the easy questions, they have a little more leeway sometimes. And so if you're nitpicking the answer choices on an easy question, if the problem you saw with it were a problem, you'd probably be looking at a 5-star question, but you're looking at a 1-star question. And so that's not really a problem. So I think sometimes when you are learning the LSAT and you're practicing the tough questions, you get into an overthinking mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that mentality serves you in the 5-star questions, but you got to remember the sort of pacing of an LR section where it generally goes from easy to hard. Henry, do you have other ideas on what might be going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the nitpicking component, there's like two elements where you're thinking of the easy questions as hard. And as you mentioned, maybe a right answer choice in an easy question, it looks like it might have a couple issues. Maybe it uses the word many instead of most, or maybe the stimulus is about how people like or people buy a lot of pies and you're trying to explain why. And then it answers, oh, people like to eat pies. But you say, oh, isn't there a distinction between liking something and eating it or whatnot? And you're kind of what you said, you're nitpicking. And maybe there is. But of course, that would make this question very difficult, and it's probably not a difficult question. The other side is just like trying to game out, like, oh, does this look too good to be true? Right? Where does this answer look obviously correct? Oh, it can't be. Nothing on the outside is obvious, right? When I first took the test, everything looked obviously right, and I got a 130, right, or whatever. I got a really bad, I shouldn't say really bad score. I got a less preferable score, even though I was super confident that answer choices were right. And I should never do that to yourself. Like after you study, of course, some answer choices are going to begin to look right. You've studied. And so if something looks obviously correct and it's early in the test, you should just pick the one that's obviously correct. In my mind, right? If something looks obviously good, don't try to say like, oh, this looks too good to be true, so I got to keep on going. Because that's when you start like gaming the test, not in anything that's actually on the page, but just based on prior experience. So those are the two. Now, I think the other side of that is whatever I hate to say, like you're too confident maybe, and you have like you're overconfident in yourself, right. And I don't even want to call that like necessarily like overconfident in your own abilities, or you're overconfident on the easy questions. I feel like it just might be a general overconfidence, right, where you're maybe not picking up on certain traps, or you think you are not as prone to traps as you might be. I don't know. Does that kind of make sense, or am I?
It does. I think you said it beautifully. Maybe these are sort of issues with psychology.
Yeah.
On one hand, you're second guessing yourself. You don't have the confidence, so you see the right answer and you think, oh, but I'm not smart enough to have found the right answer, and you think yourself out of it. On the other hand, you're overconfident, where you're saying, oh, well, I'm impervious to all these traps, and then you're falling into one.
Yeah.
So you might land anywhere on that spectrum, or maybe it's a little bit of both, depending on the question or question type. So certainly, it makes sense that like if one's overconfident, they're missing a trap. If they're underconfident, they're just talking themselves out of the great work they just did to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, either way.
Yeah, I think there's too, like, there's a spectrum of traps, right? Where
Yeah.
if you know the question is hard or you're in question 17, and even though the trap might not be easy, you're like really looking for it. And so maybe you'll be able to see it.
Yeah.
There are some things that I don't really think are traps, like a comparative
Mm,
versus absolute. It's a trap in a certain sense. You know,
mm,
oh, John is taller than Jake. Does that make John tall? I don't know. Maybe not. Some people might say yes, but no, right? It's a comparative. But once you know that is, I hesitate to call that a real trap because you just see it so much. And it's not the hardest thing to explain away. So like just being sensitive to that, like there are quote unquote traps on easier questions, but they are more fundamental. I don't. Does that kind of make sense there? Right?
it
Where
does. It does. When you were saying that, it makes total sense. I agree with that. And when you were saying that, it made me think of something that I think is maybe important to emphasize. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't. But um, I just wouldn't always take question difficulty to heart. Right? The difficulty is based on data about how many people got it right and what their typical score was. And sometimes that range is huge. You'll see a question that like the people who got it right ranged from 145 to 175. And so, it's hard to say what questions are really harder than others. And certainly there are general trends. And at Seven Sage, we do rank the questions 1 through 5 star. And that's generally helpful for most people. But
Mhm.
you might not necessarily feel the difficulty in the same way, depending on who you are and how you think. You might see a 5 star question that's easy for you one day, and you might see a 3 star question that seems pretty hard.
Yeah.
Again, it's all based on data from past test takers who you may or may not align with. So I would say, yes, difficulty is real, but you don't have to take it 100% to heart. And I think I only bring that up because of your point around like, well, what is a trap? Do I consider that a trap? Would that trap me?
Yeah.
Maybe there's certain traps that would never trap you. And that's because you just are primed to see them naturally. And so I only bring that up. I don't know how you feel about difficulty, Henry, but at some point when I was in my studying, difficulty ratings stopped really being the main thing I looked at. And maybe it's healthy to throw in, if you're practicing a certain difficulty rating, throw in a couple questions that are not that difficulty rating, just to keep your mind a little active and not to get locked into one type of thinking. Yeah. What do you think, Henry?
Yeah. No, I entirely agree. I mean, a lot of these questions are uh, the same, right? Where
Yeah.
it's just structurally the same. A lot of
Right.
these 5 star sufficient assumption questions. I mean, I look at them and it's like it looks exactly the same as a 1 star sufficient assumption question.
Right.
Uh, they do the same thing. Maybe they're dressed up a little bit differently. And so I guess that also could just speak to what I don't know. I don't know if you've encountered this. Though sometimes people really think about problems, right? Like they try to think about the content of a
Mm,
sufficient assumption question, right? It's talking about like the mind and its relationship to consciousness and X, Y, and Z. And they're like really thinking
mm,
about the mind and consciousness.
yeah.
Whereas like most of the time in a sufficient assumption question, it's not even like the content doesn't really matter, right? It's just like
Right.
the relationship between conditionals. And so I guess there could also be something going on there too, where it's like you're spending more time thinking about the question. Maybe you happen to get a right answer instead of just scaling back and be like all these questions should just be structure based. Or a lot, not I hate to say all, that's not all, but a lot of them could be. And I would also maybe suggest that that could also be what's going on. What's making things harder or easier might be that your frame of mind, as you said, isn't like you don't look at the question in the same way that someone who is taking, the test well and is in their 170s, right? They
Mm,
don't look at a causal reasoning question as phenomenon hypothesis. They just look at it as like an independent question, unlike any other ones.
mhm.
And so I think, yeah, that was just one thing that you kind of reminded me of in terms of thinking. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you have any other recommendations for Ashley?
Um, yeah, I don't know if I have anything else. I think I just want to say it's like totally normal. Certainly happened to me a bunch, especially early on in my studying. The stuff I got right and wrong was really like scattered and sporadic, and um, it's hard to really diagnose where you're at early
Yeah.
on. But what you got to do is just keep drilling, keep blind reviewing, keep wrong answer journaling, and you'll pick up on the trends of what you really need to work on. And what you need to work on might not align squarely with any difficulty rating. It might be a question type, or it might be a couple question types, or whatever, or a skill within a question type.
Yeah.
It might not be that, oh, I'm getting 3 stars, so now I need to work on 4 stars. So just pay attention to where you're at, and what you need to work on, even outside of just raw difficulty rating.
Yeah. I'm guessing most people probably fall into that first bucket though, where you look at every question as if it's impossible, right? And
Yeah.
instead of just like if one answer looks really good, just being willing to pick it, right, and see what happens.
Yeah, see what happens. And if it's wrong, that's great news, because that's an opportunity to assess your thinking and
Yeah.
line it up with where it needs to be.
Well, all right. You wanna take us out of here?
Yeah. Well, thank you all for listening. Thank you, Ashley, for sending in the question. Enjoy your free month of live. If you, the viewers and listeners, have your own questions, send them to us. And if we pick yours to answer on the show, you will also get a free month of live. So send your questions. We love to answer them. This was ZeSean and Henry. We'll see you next time.
All right. Peace.
Peace.